Hey, welcome to this video. Today we're going to build this application using React, .NET Core 5.0 and MongoDB. With this application, we can upload a study group which will be stored in our MongoDB. Then we can select any of the study groups that we have already uploaded and they will be displayed in a carousel. And if we click on any of the given cards, it will flip and we can see the answer to that specific question. And to upload a study group, it's just going to be an Excel file. So as you can see, we have a front column and a back column. So first it's going to show 2 plus 1, and if we click on that card, it's going to be flipped and a 3 is going to show up. And if we click on that 3, of course, it's going to show 2 plus 1, and then it's going to go to the next one and the next one, so on and so forth. So to start from the beginning, if we click and expand your groups, we're going to see that we don't have any groups right now. And if we expand upload new, we can click here to select the file, or we can just drop one. So I'm just going to drop the one that I was just showing. So drop it in here. And if we expand your groups, then we're going to see it here, Math for Kids. And if we start it, we're going to get our questions and the answer. I'm excited to show you how to build this application. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get started. So let's start off by creating our React application. And just like we have done before, we're going to use the npx command. So let's do npx create React app, and let's call it study groups. And hit enter. Okay, now that it's finished, let's go inside that project. So study groups, and I'm going to do code dot, and this is going to open Visual Studio Code for me. Let's go ahead and open a terminal again, and let's install all the things that we're going to be needing. So we can do npm install. So let's do Axios, react-dropzone, xlsx-parse-json, and lastly, let's do React bootstrap at next bootstrap at 5.1.0, which is the one that is currently in their page. So essentially, we're going to be using Axios to make our HTTP request to our API that we're going to build later. The drop zone will be for our file to be dropped there and get the file out of it, a reference. And the XLS parser would be to parse that data that we have in the file and parse it to a JSON so we can use it as a JSON type. And finally, we're going to be using Bootstrap. That's how we're going to build our carousel and all the other stuff. And of course, we're going to learn how to work with these. These are extremely helpful and very easy to use. So I really hope you guys like it as well. So don't forget to hit enter so it runs, and it's going to take a little while, and then you should be good to go. Let's go ahead now and expand source. And let's open app.js. And here we can pretty much clean this up. Okay. And I have const app. Here we go. And let's start off by doing a div. And let's have a class name. Let's just call it app. Let's have some kind of title. So we can say study groups. And next, let's do the accordions. This is where we going to have that expanded section that you can upload the file or select your groups. But before we can do that, let's make sure we are importing the CSS file from Bootstrap. So let's do import bootstrap /dist/css/bootstrap.min.css. And I want to show you where you can find this yourself. So if you go to their official documentation for React Bootstrap, you can find the npm install. So this is the one we just installed. And if you go down here, you can find where to import the CSS. And if we go over to components, let's go to accordion. And here we can see an example of how this works. So let's copy this and let's head back to our code. So back at the code, we can paste the example we just copied. Here it is. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. And on the header for this one, we can say something like upload new. And on this header, we can say your groups. I'm going to auto format my code. And up here, I'm going to import the accordion. So I can do import accordion from React, Bootstrap, accordion. There you go. Let's return this. Let's save this file and let's do npm start on our console. Cool, and we see it pop up with nice 2 accordions, and by default this one was expanded, so we can remove that so it is not, but pretty cool. Let's go back to our code. I'm going to remove the default active key so it's not expanded from the beginning. And now let's start working on the upload portion. So let's create a directory under source, new folder, and let's call it components. And inside components, let's create a new file. Let's call it create group. And on this component, we're going to show the Dropbox area, and we're going to be enabling the user, allowing the user to drop their file here. As you know, we're going to be using react-dropzone, so I head over to their official documentation on npmjs.com, and you can search for react-dropzone. And if you scroll down, they show you 2 examples of how to use this. There's the hook version and the wrapper version. So I'm going to copy this to save time and head back to the code. Okay, back here, I'm going to paste this, and I'm going to create the component. So I'll call it create group. Okay, and here we can just return this. There's nothing much to do. And then we can do export default create group. And let's do a little cleanup. So we can do div. And let's close it there. There you go. And I'm going to auto format this as well. And let's have a class name. Let's call it dropzone. And I'm going to say job file here. Missing the closing tag. There you go. Before checking the browser, let's open up app CSS and I'm going to clean this up. Let's add some style to this. So we can do the body, and let's have some color. We can do RGB 26, 22, 22. And I'll make this important just to make sure that it applies. Then I'll have an app, and then I'll do max width, 900 pixels, and margin auto. And for H2, we can do color white smoke. And now for the drop zone, we can have a border. So we can do 2 pixels dashed, and let's say black. And border radius, we're gonna say is 5 pixels. This will make the corners like curvy kind of thing. Let's have some padding, 75 pixels. Let's do margin and text align. Let's do center, and lastly, let's do a font size of large. Okay. Save this and save your create group as well. And let's head back to app.js. And let's add our component to the body. So we can do create group. And let's close that tag. And make sure yours is imported. Mine got imported automatically. And now let's head back to browser. Okay, so our app is looking really nice right now. Let's expand the first group. And pretty good. We see the drop file here. So I'm going to drop a file in there. And I'm gonna hit F12. I'm in Windows, but open the console and check out the console log. Right here we can see that there's a file, math for kids, that's the name, and last modify and whatnot. So that means we're getting the file. Pretty cool. Okay, and now that we're able to select the file, we have to have a way to parse it to a JSON so that we can use the data more easily. So the xlsx, if I can pronounce that correctly, parse-json does exactly that, and it works very, very well. So went to npm.js and official documentation. There's a way to install it, which we already did. And then there's how to use it. So I'm just going to copy this and let's head over to our code. Okay, so back at the code, let's paste that in here. So I'm going to replace this. Hit enter here, and I'm going to paste it in here. Let me move this up. And here, I'm going to get rid of that semicolon. There you go. And as you can see, this takes a file, which will be our accepted file. Let's get the first item with the first file in the array. And then we can see that the data is parsed over here. So what we can do is do a console log and see what we get from here. Make sure it's working. Data, and save this. Let's head to the browser. I'm going to drop math for kids here, and we can see that it has 7 elements in there. And there you go. So we have an array, and each one has a front and a back, and it says 2 + 1, 3, and so on and so forth. So pretty cool. We have the data, and it's parsed as a JSON, so we can use it pretty easily right now. So awesome. And now that we have this data, we need to store it somewhere. So I think it would be a good time to start working on our web API and store this in our MongoDB. Okay, so I have Visual Studio 2019 open. So I'm gonna click on Create New Project. Let's click on ASP.NET Core Web API, click Next. For name, let's pick Study Groups .web API. Click Next. And target framework, make sure is .NET 5.0 and hit Create. Okay, now that it loaded up, you should see something like this. You should see a directory for controllers. And right now there's one that is a template. So we can delete this. We don't need this. Let's get rid of this. And let's rename this one, weather forecast controller to study groups controller. So we can do study groups controller. Say yes. And let's open that up. And let's do some cleanup of this stuff in our controller. So I'm gonna delete this. Get rid of the logger and this stuff. There you go. So now we're ready to start creating our first endpoint, and our first endpoint is going to be to create a group, and a group will have, say, a number of cards. We can call it cards. A card will have a front and a back, so we just have a list of those per group. And there are a few things that we're going to need to create our first endpoint, but we can start writing those and we'll map them out. So we're gonna need some kind of service. We don't want to do this logic in the endpoint itself. So let's do a private read-only iStudy group service, and let's call it group service. And we're gonna inject that here. So we can do iStudy group service. Group service. So we can do group service equal to group service. And yeah, we don't have that created yet, but we are about to create it. And maybe I should call this study group service to be more precise. Study group service, same here. And I'm just going to copy here and paste. Okay. Now on to creating our first endpoint. We're going to create an HTTP post because we're going to add or create something in the database. So I'm going to do HTTP post. And let's say public iAction result, create group. And this is going to accept a list of cards. And I guess a card would be, or not cards, but card. And I guess the list of the card would be something like front, back, and I guess the group type that it belongs to, the group name. So we can say this is cards. And then here we can call a service. So say study groups as service. It's going to have some method that we can just say add, and we kind of pass cards to that method. And then we can just return status code of 201, which means created. So now we need to create card and study group service. So let's start off by creating the model for the card. So let's create a new directory. So let's right click on Web API and we can do add new folder. And let's call it database. And inside database, we can create another directory. And let's call it models. So here's where our models are going to be. So let's add a new class. And let's call it card. On this video, I'm keeping everything inside the Web API project. We're going to do the business logic here and the database and all this stuff. But if you're interested in seeing different architecture, check out some of my other videos that I do class libraries and separate it a little more. All right, so let's go ahead and create an ID. So we'll have public string ID, cat set, and we need attributes for this. So we need an ID and a representation. Type that object ID. Okay, we'll need this, and of course we'll need to install the package MongoDB.json. So install that. And for this type, we would need the MongoDB.json using that one. There you go. So we have the ID now. So next we're going to need a group name. Set. We'll need a, let's see, string. We'll need let's call it front. That's fine. And let's call this one back. Let me get rid of this so we don't need it, and save this file. Okay, so as a quick recap, we have a card, which is just, it has an ID, it has a group name, whichever group it belongs to, say math for kids. It has a front part, which this would be, say, 1 + 5. And the back part will be the answer, which in this case will be like 6, or whatever it may be for you. Okay, now that we have this, let's go and create our study group service. So let's right click on the Web API and let's add a new directory. Let's call it business. And let's create, we're going to create an interface, and let's call it iStudy group service. Actually going to copy that. Let's add that, and let's add an implementation as well. And let's call it study group service. Back to the interface though, let's create our first method, but first let's make this public. We need it to be public. Let's make this void and do add, and then this will take a list of card, which we're just gonna call cards. And now we should be able to see this. So let's make sure we're using study groups that web API. Okay. And I'm gonna get rid of the stuff we're not using. Okay, and I'm gonna save this. Now let's go to the service. And this is gonna make use of that interface. So let's do study group service, and let's implement the interface. And before we can do much more here, we need to have some kind of setup of our database and our connection to our database. So for that, let's create a few files, one for DB client just to interact with the database, and one for the configuration of the database. Let's go ahead and right click on database and do add class. And let's add a DB config. Let's add an interface. Let's call it IDB client. And lastly, let's add the implementation of that interface. So it's just a class. We got it. We're going to call it DB client. There you go. Let's start off with the config, DB config, which is pretty easy. So here we're going to need a public string, say database name property. So get set. And we're going to have a connection string to that database. Get set. And that's pretty much all we need here. Okay, save that file. And let's go to our IDB client. And in here, let's have a method that will actually get us the collection that we need. So let's make sure we put this public. And this is going to return an iMongo collection of card. And we're going to call it get cards collection. So this is specific to the cards collection. And we need to make sure we install the package mongodb.driver. So hit install. And now make sure we're using that. And that's it. Semicolon here. Save this file. And let's go to DB client, sorry. All right, so we're gonna do IDB client and implement that interface. Get rid of that stuff. And here we're gonna have a private read-only iMongo database. So we're gonna have a database instance here. And inside here, let's have a constructor, public DB client. And we're gonna get an iOptions DB config. And if you're new to iOptions, this is a way to map our configuration. And you'll see in a second how that maps out. So I'm going to be using Microsoft.extension.options. So make sure you have that. And do DB config. And I put this in the wrong place. Sorry about that. There you go. Okay. So in here now, we need to get the clients. So we're going to do var client equal to a new Mongo client. And we're going to have the DB config that value that connection string. And our database will be equal to a client that gets database. And that's going to come from value that, let's do database name. There you go, database name. Okay, so we create our client. Then from the client, we get the database. And of course, these values come from the configuration. And we have the database. Once we have the database, then this becomes really easy, because all we got to do here would be to return the database that get collection, that card. And here we can pass like some configuration of whatever collection name we have or some constant. For now, we're just going to do a string and just do cards, and that's going to be our collection name. Let's remove this and save this file. And now we can go back to our service, and we'll need some kind of interface here. So let's do public study group service. And of course, we need to inject, oops. There you go. We need to inject the IDB client and make sure we see that. So I'm using the database. There you go. So DB client, and let's call like cards collection equal to DB client dot get cards collection. So let's make sure we have this up here. So private read only iMongo collection of card is cards collection. So make sure we're using that. There you go. Okay, so we get a DB client, we call the get cards collection, and then we assign it to cards collection. So now we have the collection and we're able to use it. Since we can use it, then right here, whenever we call this method to add the cards, it becomes really simple. So all we got to do is cards, that collection, that insert many, and pass in cards. And that's pretty much it. Let's get rid of that and save this file. Let's go a level up to our controller and make sure we are using the right stuff here. So we're using that, and same for card. And let me get rid of the stuff that we're not using. So we're almost done. So we need to make sure that everything is hooked up properly. If not, it's not going to work. So let's go to startup. And there's a few things we got to do here. Let's start off by cleaning some of this stuff up. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so there's a few things we got to do here. Let's start in the configuration service method, and let's add anywhere here is fine. So we're going to do services that configured, and we're going to do db config. Make sure we're using that. And we're going to do, configuration. So with this, we should be able now to use iOptions, and we should be able to map the values that we need to that. And where we're going to put the values is going to be in launch settings, and we're going to do that right after this. I'll show you in a second. So next thing, we're going to have added singleton. And this is going to create one instance of IDB client. So whenever we add that to our constructor, it's going to inject this instance of IDB client. We need another instance, and we're going to do an add transient of iStudy group service. Hope I did that right. Yep, okay. And study group service. There you go. Didn't miss a typo. It didn't have a typo, so that's good. All right, so with that out of the way, we have our singleton transient, and transient is every time someone needs an instance of study group service, it would just, one will be created and give it to it. So let's now add a course, because as you know from my other videos, if you don't have course, you have like a course issues and you won't be able to call the backend service. So let's do services that add course, and let's pass on options. And we can do options that at default policy, builder, and we're going to do builder that with origins. And then we can do allow any header and allow any method. Semicolon here, semicolon here. And let's scroll down. And after routing, we can do app that use course. Okay, so recap, we configured the DB config. So we should now be able to use iOptions and just have our configuration mapped. We added a singleton for our DB client. This is going to create one instance for the lifetime of the application. And we have a transient. This is going to create an instance every time one is needed. And we're going to have study group service. So that's good. And then finally, we added course. And this will prevent us from having course errors. So we're just one step ahead. So last thing we're going to look at for now is let's go to launch settings and add the properties that we're missing. So if you expand properties and open launch settings, here's where we're going to add it. So let's do a comma here, and we need to use the same name, and .NET is going to just be responsible for mapping this correctly. So it's a little bit of magic, but we don't have to worry about it. So we just make sure we have the same name. So we called it database name, and we can call it, say, study groups. And on the bottom, we're going to have a connection string. And we still don't have value for that. Let's copy this though and paste it right here. And as you guessed it, now it's time to set up our MongoDB. There are actually multiple options you can use for this. If you have MongoDB on your computer, feel free to use that. As long as you get the connection string, that should work. You can go the cloud option, which I have a video that it covered how to get that set up and started with that. I'll link it in the description as well. I have to say the cloud option is very easy to get started, and you don't have to worry about installing any software on your computer. And then there's the Docker way, which is what we're going to be using in this video. If you don't have Docker installed, I'm going to put the documentation on the description so you can follow that and get it installed. But once you have it installed, it's super easy to spin up an instance of MongoDB. If you need to pause the video or skip ahead because you already have the instance, feel free to do so. But right now we're going to actually spin up a MongoDB instance using Docker. So I'm right here at Docker Hub, and I'm looking at the official image for Mongo, and this is the one we're going to be using for our database. Before trying any commands, make sure you are running Docker. As you can see, I have no running containers. And now pull up a bash and let's write a command. Okay, so on our command, let's start typing docker run. Let's map the port, which the default is 27017 to 27017. Let's put a name on it. Let's say MongoDB, and let's run it detached mode, and let's put the name of the image, which is Mongo, and hit enter. Okay, our image is now running, so that means we have MongoDB running. Cool. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now we can go back to our web API and specify the connection string. Remember, my connection string might be different from yours. Maybe you use cloud instead of doing Docker image, so keep that in mind. But if you follow me using Docker, it should be, the default will be MongoDB localhost, and then the port is 27017. And let's copy that and put it here as well. And that's it, save that file. Okay, I think it's a good point to see if our project actually builds. So let's go over to build and build solution and see if it builds successfully. And so far, it looks good. Let's go ahead now and run it. And the Swagger page popped up, which is a good sign. And we can see the schema here. We have a card with all the stuff that we wanted. And if we expand the endpoint, we can see study groups and we can see what it needs. Pretty cool. Let's actually try to make a post here and see if anything breaks or something happens. So I'm gonna get rid of ID and I'm gonna say this is a test, and I'm gonna say test front, and this will be test back. And I'm gonna click on execute. And I did get a tool 1, which is a good sign. That means that it got created. So far it looks good. To better test this, let's add an endpoint so that we can retrieve all the cards if we give it a group name. So if we go back to our code and we go to study groups controller, we can do an HTTP get, and we're going to be passing in the group name and say we do public iAction result get group, and we pass in the group name. And here we can just return an OK, which is a 200. And we're going to call our service, and we need to add a method here. Say we call it get group, and we pass in group name. Obviously this is red because we haven't implemented this. So let's go to our interface and add that. So head over to iStudy group service. Right here we can do an IEnumerable of card, and we called it get group, and we are passing a group name, and that's it. Let's go over to the implementation. It's going to say, hey, you haven't implemented everything, so let's implement the interface. And right here, what we can do is we can just return immediately. So we can do it like this and say cards collection that find cards, and then do cards that group name, there you go, that equals the group name. And then have this go to an IEnumerable or enumerable, and that's it. So basically we're going through the cards, and wherever the name matches, we're just returning that card. All right, save this and let's run it. Okay, so we see our other endpoint here, study groups / group name. So let's try it out. Click try out. And let's put the group name, which I think it was test that I put. So execute. And okay, we get a 200. We have an ID that got created automatically for us. This is good. Group name test front, and test back test back. Okay, cool. So this worked. So we should add another endpoint, one that will retrieve all the group names that exist that we have. So let's do that one next. Okay, so back at our study groups controller, let's add another endpoint. This would be another HTTP get. And let's say this would be group dash names. And we can do public iAction result, and we can call it get group names, and doesn't take anything. And this one returns an OK. And then we're going to call a service that we're going to say get group names. Okay, and of course we got to go implement that. So let's go over to iStudyGroup service and let's add an IEnumerable. This will be a string, and we said it would be like get group names. It takes nothing. All right, save that. And let's go over to study group service and make sure we're implementing that. So implement interface, and right here we have it. And we can do an arrow so we can return, and let's use our service cards collection, and do as queryable, do a select, make sure we're using link. So using system.link, yes to that. And we can do x that group name, and let's just get the distinct. So basically we're going through the collection, grabbing the group name and just getting the different group names. Okay, save that and let's run it. And now if we go over and expand the group names and hit try out and execute. Okay, we get back test, which is the only one we have added so far. Pretty cool. Let's now add the final endpoint we need is to delete any group. So let's implement that one. So back to our study groups controller, let's add another endpoint. This would be an HTTP delete. And it's going to take a group name. It's a public iAction result delete group. And it takes a group name. Okay. And this is going to be using the service that delete group. We're going to pass in the group name. And finally, we're going to return it to 100 with the group name. All right, let's go over to our iStudyGroup service and add that to the interface. And this would be a void delete group. And it's going to take string group name. Save that. Let's head over to study group service. Make sure we implement this. Here it is. And here we just got to do cards dot delete many cards dot group name that equals group name. So essentially we're going to be deleting everywhere we find that group name. And that's it. Save this and let's run it. Okay, and I got an exception and it's something about curly brace. So let's go to the controller and there you go. I'm missing a curly brace here. So let me save that and let's spin that up again. And we see our delete here and let's try it out. So I'm going to do test and execute. And we get a response of test and 200. Now, if we were to get all the group names and execute, we actually just get an empty array. Pretty cool. We're now ready to go to our front end and start consuming our API. Let's copy our path right here. And this is going to be our base URL. And let's head over to our front end code. Back at our front end code, let's hook up creating a group. Like let's pass some cards over and make sure they're stored in the database. Okay, so let's start off by importing Axios. And in here, normally I will put this in an environment, but make it a little simpler. I'm going to leave it here and I'm going to paste the path that I just copied and then do study group. Let's create a function that will create a group or make a call. So we can do const create group async, pass in cards, and in here we can do a try and catch. Okay, no help from intelligence, that's fine. Catch, we can do an E. And then here we can do console.log error. Just in case something wrong happens. We have a log. And in here we can do await axios.post. This is a post. And we're going to do base URL, comma, pass in the cards. So, okay. So when create group is called, we're going to be passing cards. And we're going to make a request to our base URL, basically our API, and pass in the cards, and that's pretty much it. Now we can pass this function to our create group, which is right here. I couldn't see it. There you go. Create group. Create group. And we can use that in there. So let's head over to create group. Now we haven't specified a group name in our file itself. We only have like front and back information. So what we can do is have the name of the file be the group name. So let's add that to the object itself. So we can do data.sheet1, which is the first sheet, that map. And we can do the.group name. It's going to be equal to accepted files at 0 dot name. So essentially we're creating a group and specifying to be the file name. And now we can call create group and pass in data.sheet1. Oops, it shouldn't be capital, it should be lowercase. And let's not forget to pass it here. So we got to do create group inside curly braces. Now let's save this and head to the browser. All right, so this is a file I'm going to upload. It's called Math for Kids, and it has the information front and back. So let me upload that one. And we get a 404, which means it couldn't find it. And I think I know why. I think it's because we're missing an S. I think it's not study group, but instead I think it's study groups. So let's go ahead and add study groups with an S instead of study group. And the reason for it is that our controller name is study groups. And this denotes that it's going to get the name of the class except controller. So it's going to leave this part out. So the path is localhost, whichever port it is, / study groups. And then if we specify any of these, it would be /, for example, group names. So that's why. So let's go back to the browser, and I think it should work this time. So we're back at the browser, and I want to try to re-upload the file. Okay. And this time we got a 201, which is good. That means it got created. So let's go to the Swagger page and see if our data is there. So at the Swagger page, we can try the groups names and execute that one. And there you go, we have Math for Kids. And if we copy this name, we can go up here and go to group, try out, paste that in there. We can execute it, and there you go. We can see the group name and front and back for every one of those. Really cool. Okay, let's now work on the select group part. So let's go to components, right click, and add a new file. Let's name it select group.js. There you go. So we can do const select group. And select group we'll need a few methods or functions that we're going to create, such as group names, get group, and delete group. We're going to create a table, and let's do hover. And the body of the table, we're going to go through the group names, and we're going to get the name out and the index. And for the table row, we'll have a key equal to index. Close that out. And we'll have a table data. And then here we're just going to display the group name. And then we'll have a button. So we can say button, and then on click, on click, we can call the get group. That means the user selected that group. So we want to load it up. And then we're going to pass in the group name. Okay, and then we'll call it start. And the next one and final one will be another data field, and then this will be button, and then on click, space here. There you go. We want to delete the group and pass in group name. Let's do a variant of danger and say delete. Perfect. Now let me delete this and let's import the table. So table from React bootstrap / table, and let's import the button from React bootstrap / button. So to quickly recap on this component, so this is to select the group. So we're going to be passing in the group names, which are just strings. It's going to be calling our endpoint and retrieving the group names and passing it to this component. We're going to have the get group, which is going to be calling our endpoint to get that group, and the delete group, which is delete whichever group. This is going to be displaying a table. The first column would be just the name of the group. And then next to it is going to be a button that will say start. So whenever we click that, we're going to get that group, and we're going to start asking the user the questions. And then the final button will be to delete that specific group. Cool. So let's go back to app.js. And now here on the body, we can call that or set that component, select group. And that's not what I meant to do. I meant to close it right away. And in here, we're going to pass in the group names. The get group. And the delete group. Let's go ahead and implement all of those. So we can go up here and we can essentially copy this one 3 times. So one is going to be for get group names. Get group. And delete group. All right. So for the get group names, it's going to be, instead of a post, we're going to have here a get. We're going to pass in base URL, but we also need to pass, so we need to pass something else, part of the path. So we're going to do this as a variable, and then we're going to do slash group names. That's what we called it. And that's pretty much it. And here we're going to do const data to get the data out. So essentially, we're going to call this endpoint and we're going to get the data out. So this is going to be just the list or the array of our group names. So remember, the post didn't have any other path. That's why we made the base URL to be slash study groups. But for example, group names is slash group names. And then for the get and the delete, we just need to pass whatever group name value we have. And now that we're getting the data here, we need a way to set it. So for that, we're going to use a useState hook, which is a very common hook. And we're going to initialize it like this. So const, we will say group names, and then we'll say set group names be equal to useState. And then we're going to initialize it to an empty array. So the beginning is just going to be an empty array. So how this works, if you have never seen this, is this is a function. And when you call this function, you pass in a value. That value you pass is set here. Essentially, this is the variable, and this is a function that sets that variable. So this one would have all the group names. Now while we're at it, let's have one for, I guess, the current group or the group that we're displaying to the user at the moment. So we can just call it group, set group equal to useState. And this will be an empty array. Now, another hook I'm going to show you is the useState, the use effect. And this one takes a function. So we're passing a function first. So it takes a function, this is a function. And then the second parameter is an array of dependencies. Pretty much whatever you put in here, every time it changes, that variable changes, this function executes. Since we have just an empty array, it will only run once at the beginning. And we want it to run only once at the beginning to call the get group names function. This will make a request to our API and it would retrieve all the group names. And then after that, all we got to do is set the group names, pass the data to set group names, and then group names will be set. Let's make sure we finish implementing the get group and delete group. So the get group would be similar to what we did above here. So make this a variable. There you go. And this will take the group name. And then this will be the group name we pass in. And actually, I forgot to delete this right here on get group names. So get group, we pass in the group name. We make a request here. Let's change this from a post to a get. And then this should be the path. We don't need this. And double checking. Looks good. The only thing we got to do left is get the response. And then set that group. So this will be the group that we're showing to the user. Data. Okay. And lastly, let's do the delete group. So this one, instead of a post, this is a delete. And I'm going to copy this because this will be the same thing. Put it here, and then we're going to pass in group name. So I'm going to copy this. Okay, just double checking, make sure get group is using a get here, and the URL looks like this. And then we're setting groups. Delete is using a delete, and then we're passing the right URL to it. Then the last thing I can think of is that once we delete a group, we should update the list of groups we're displaying. So we can just call the get group names to update that. Or another way we can do it if we want to save a request is if this is successful, we can straight up just go and filter this out and take this group out. But in our case, that should be fine. We can just do it like that. And the same thing should be added here. If we add a group, if we create a group, we should update the get group names. That way it would just show on the list. Lastly, let's remember to import the things that we need. So I'm going to copy this one and do here select group. And this should be select group. Did I have a typo, I guess? Let me scroll down. Select group. Okay, that should be there. Okay, there you go. I got the color. And let's import the use state and the use effect from React. Perfect. And I know that was a lot, so let's do a quick recap. So we have a use effect. The use effect has or is calling get group names, and this happens only once at the beginning. Okay, so calling this, we'll go to here. We'll be calling this, and all this does is calls our endpoint, and it says, hey, give me all the group names. So we get that data, and we set the group names pretty much. So now at this point, group names is set, and that's it. Then we pass in group names to select group, and select group will make sure to display them in a table. So looking good so far. Now, whenever we create a group, we're going to make a call, create a group, and then we're going to call get group names. And then this will make sure to update the group names on the table. Same thing if we were to delete a group, we will call get group names so that the table gets updated. Lastly, if select group clicks on the button start, we know it's going to call the get group, and get group will make a call to our endpoint, pass the group name, we're going to get the data back, and then we're going to set that group. So at that point, our group is going to be the current group that the user selected, and we should be able now to go and display that group to the user. And one thing I forgot to put here is do the export default. Select group. And I have a typo here on button, and let's make sure we're returning the table. Okay, so let's see how the UI is looking. So if we expand groups, your groups, we can see the file that we had uploaded before, and we can click start, but wouldn't do anything right now. And we can click delete, and it will go away. And if we were to upload and check your groups, it should be here. And now we're ready to start working on a carousel. So I'm going to scroll all the way down. And right here, we're about to create a new component. Let's call it study carousel. And let's pass in the group. Obviously, we got to create this component. So let's right click here, create it. Let's go ahead and import a couple of things we need. The use state from React. And also let's import carousel from React bootstrap/carousel. Let's do const study carousel equal to, and this we're going to be getting the group that we're going to be displaying. let's not forget to export default. Okay, now in here, we're going to have a show front, set show front. We're going to make use of the use state for this. So by default, it will be true, meaning by default, we're going to be showing the front of the card. And then we can go and return carousel. And then we're going to say it's hidden if we don't have a group, or if the group that length is 0. We don't want to show it. Oh, I put way too many equals there. There you go. And on slide, we want to set show front to true. So basically every time the cursor slides, we just want to start from the front of the card. So now we want to go through each card. So we can do group, map, and then this would be card, comma index. And then we're going to do carousel.item. So in here, we're going to have a key, which is just going to be the index. And on click, we want to set show front to show front, not show front. So every time we click on the card, we want to essentially flip it by toggling this boolean. And now let's show the content. So let me format this real quick. There you go. So we can do div class name equal to. So here it depends. So this is the first div is going to be the card, and then we're going to have something for the content itself. So if it's show front, we want to show something like card dash front. Else, we want to have like card back and flip. And inside here, we're going to have an h3. And this would have a class name. And then if we want to show the front, we're just going to show the content. Else, we want to show content and flip. Then inside here, we can do show front. It will be card.front or card.back. So if we're showing the front, we want to show the front of the card. If this is false, that means we're going to show the back of the card. So right now we're very close to finishing. All we're missing is adding this style. So let's go to app.css. Let's scroll down a little bit, and we can start off by doing the card. So say we do a margin of 1 and a height of 500 pixels. Let's also change the cursor just so that looks a little better. Let's make it pointer. And let's do a transition. And this will mess with how fast you'll see a flip. So we can do transform 0.9 seconds, and let's do transform style to preserve 3D. Cool. Let's do now card front. We can do a background color of, say, like yellow green, and let's make it important to make sure we get the changes. Keep scrolling down a little bit. Let's do card back, and let's do background color. Let's make it this and make sure we make it important. All right, so for the flip, we can just do a transform, and we're going to say to rotate on the y-axis by 180 degrees. And then let's do content, text align, center, top 47%, position, relative, and let's do backface, visibility hidden. That way it doesn't show the back of the card when it flips. So I see that it's failing to compile. It says it's not finding static carousel. So let's make sure we are importing that. app.js. So I'm going to do study carousel and import that. And another thing I noticed is that select group, on click, have a typo here. This one I saw earlier on the browser, so make sure I have that. And that's pretty much it. Now let's go to the browser and test this out. Okay, so I'm gonna start Math for Kids, and there you go. The carousel is alive, so pretty cool, pretty cool. So it's working, it's moving by itself as well. We can click on it and we can flip a card. We can even go back if we wanted to. And we can try uploading something else. Let's do some Spanish words. Let's see if I click start. There you go. Hola. Hello. Pretty cool. And with this, we have reached the end of this video. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already and you want to support this channel, please hit the subscribe button, like this video, and I will catch you all on the next one.